Hello, everyone. Today we're going to delve into one of the most spiritually potent psalms in the Bible. What comes to mind when you read Psalm 23? Let's explore the significance of Psalm 23 together to understand its relevance to each of us. This psalm might be one of the most memorable passages in the Bible. In fact, it probably is, alongside John 3:16. Are you familiar with the lines, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, he leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul, he leadeth me in the paths of righteousness, for his name's sake." Psalm 23:1-3. In the latter part of the first verse of Psalm 23, King David wrote, "I shall not want." The Hebrew phrase lo e'esar lo exar can be translated as "I shall not lack." The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Psalm 23:1. If you look across various English translations of this verse, you'll get a sense of what David meant. I shall not want, or I shall not lack, or I shall not be in want, or I shall not lack anything, or I shall not be in need, or I lack nothing, or I am content, or I have everything I need. Essentially, with this small phrase, David is saying that we need to be like sheep, fully trusting the shepherd, who will provide for their every need. Thus, we will lack nothing. It's a cause and effect statement because the Lord is my shepherd. I have everything I need, and I shall not be in want. Usually our perceptions of green pastures are very idealistic: sea of green grass knee-high, pleasant temperature, and blue sky overhead. It seems like you could just lie down there and fall asleep instantly. But let's pause for a moment and think about David and the land he called home. David spent his entire life in the land of Israel. In his youth, he was a shepherd in Judah. Later, he became a king, ruling from Hebron in Jerusalem. But before becoming king, David spent many years hiding in the wilderness. Would you like me to continue the translation, or is this sufficient for your needs? David wrote Psalm 23, understanding the life of a shepherd intimately. However, he wrote this song through the eyes of a sheep. The land of Judea serves as a poignant reminder of how hopeless a sheep's life is without a shepherd. Dependent on the shepherd and protector, sheep can feel quite vulnerable without someone to rely on. David knew this and turned his gaze towards God. Standing amidst this land and looking around, we might wonder, what pastures did David write about? Psalm 23 is a beautiful depiction of who God is and who he desires to be for us. In Israel, it's easier to notice how much more meaning and depth there is in these comforting verses. We need God's guidance even just to survive. Imagine a small plot of land with grass in the desert. Warm Mediterranean air blows through the desert at night. And when this warm, humid air passes over a hillside or rock, some grass can sprout overnight. There's enough grass for one meal, no more. To find more food, the sheep need to turn to their shepherd. What's the catch? The shepherd patiently leads his sheep, ensuring they have enough to eat. I'm afraid a lush green pasture, like in the movies, won't be necessary for us. In a culture so focused on self-sufficiency, God calls us to depend on him. We can trust our shepherd, even in the desert. Trust him to lead us to food. Have you ever trusted someone so much that you wrote a song about them? David depended on God for everything he needed to survive. He didn't write about his status or other relationships, because he knew God would lead him in the right way. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff. They comfort me. Psalm 23:3-4. The Hebrew word paths used in Psalm 23 is the same word used to denote a person walking in a circular path. I don't know when you were last in a rocky desert, but to descend from a steep hill, you can't just run straight down. The shepherd leads the sheep down from the mountain, essentially going around it. Over the years, the sheep have trodden these paths. That's what the Bible means when it talks about paths of righteousness. Psalm 23 says that's how the sheep safely descended from the mountain. We assume that paths of righteousness must be very clearly marked. We want what's right to be obvious. But more often than not, there are many different paths, options, and choices to make. Maybe you're wondering today what the right step is for you. That's why we have a shepherd who leads us. He knows the right choice in any circumstance. We're all like sheep, and the problem with this thought is that we don't like to identify ourselves with sheep. Due to age-old stereotypes, we tend to consider sheep some of the dumbest animals God ever created. We don't view them as the smartest and largely defenseless. They have a tendency to wander into dangerous places. They need the care and protection of the shepherd, someone who will take care of their slightest needs and lead them where they need to be. Humanity sees itself quite differently. Have you ever noticed that there are no sports teams with the word sheep in their name? Typically, you don't think of courage and victory when you think of them. When the Lord called us sheep, it might not be particularly flattering, but it's certainly accurate. The prophet Isaiah compared our sin to the wandering of sheep when he wrote, "We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all," Isaiah 53:6. Like lost sheep, we tend to stray from the right path that God has laid out for us in His Word. In our human arrogance, we want to be completely independent, completely separate from God. We want to sing like Frank Sinatra, "I did it my way." And that, my friends, is sin. Just like in ancient Israel, in the time of the judges, everyone did what was right in their own eyes, Judges 21:25. The Lord could have compared His people to any other creature on earth, which would have sounded much nicer to us. He could have compared us to bears because we consider bears fierce and strong. He could have compared us to foxes because we think of foxes as clever and wise. He could have compared us to lions, creatures we consider regal, courageous, fearless, and brave. He could even have compared us to doves because we think of them as peaceful and gentle. Instead, the Lord describes His people as sheep. There is a special bond between sheep and their shepherd that isn't found anywhere else in the world. Once we acknowledge this bond, we can also acknowledge that being called sheep isn't so bad after all. Psalm 23 gives us a glimpse into the unique relationship between the heavenly shepherd and his human sheep. David wanted us to understand this. These passages of Scripture remind us that we have a special connection with our shepherd. And it's from this truth that David begins a simple lesson. Since we can say, "The Lord is my shepherd," we can also say, "I shall not want." Some things become so familiar that we no longer notice them. For example, the picture hanging on the living room wall eventually fades from our view. What is familiar is not always clearly visible. The same can happen with David's masterpiece presented in Psalm 23. The beloved words of this song hang in the church foyer, but over time, we may become unable to see them. We see them on so many coffee mugs, written against picturesque backgrounds, that we end up noticing only the cliché phrase instead of the God-inspired comfort. And the peace promised in this beloved psalm may go unnoticed if not viewed in a different context, which often presents a less serene view. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Psalm 23:1-6. Consider the passages through which David walks. Looking at this psalm anew, we might notice that not everything in it is about tranquil streams and lush pastures. David writes, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." This is the valley of thick darkness. It's where robbers and predators lurk. It's where enemies hide under the guise of shadows, and fear stirs the imagination. And this is definitely not a picture for coffee mugs, but the fact that peace reigns even in such a place makes this psalm the most beloved throughout history. Think about who leads David there. We often don't think about who leads us into such valleys. However, the psalmist did not choose this path of the shadow of death for himself. Sheep, with their sheepish nature, won't voluntarily venture into unlit places. They're not lions to behave so carelessly. On dark paths, sheep perish. So how did David end up on such a path out of all possible places? His shepherd led him there. The Good Shepherd, Christ, makes us lie down in green pastures, leads us beside still waters, and guides us through dark valleys. How important it is to realize this. When life crushes us, we're tempted to think that if we truly belong to Him, we'd never find ourselves in such places. But David thinks differently, saying, "I will fear no evil, for you are with me." He doesn't picture his shepherd scratching his head in puzzlement, wondering where they took a wrong turn. David believes that his shepherd appointed him to walk this path. "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." His shepherd, and ours, allows his people to feast in front of those seeking their lives. Notice also that he comes prepared, and the shepherd demonstrates his readiness for this route. Amidst the shadows, David notices the outlines of weapons, and the vulnerable sheep, seeing their master armed, sings, "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Being a shepherd himself, David knew they weren't for decoration. Furthermore, he knew his shepherd well enough to understand that he won't flee like a hired hand when the wolf comes, just as he didn't abandon him during Goliath's attack. David knew that shadows bowed before him. He couldn't see all the dangers ahead, but he saw the one who was with him. So what was there to fear? Think about why he leads us through these paths. At times, he mercifully allows us to sit in green pastures and enjoy sunny days. Sometimes he leads us to still waters, not turbulent streams where sheep, with their waterlogged wool, often find themselves at the bottom of the river. And those times are sweet for us. But throughout his guidance, along all the paths he offers us, he leads me in paths of righteousness. For his name's sake, he leads us to what makes us more like him. Sometimes that means learning to rest in green pastures. Other times it means finding satisfaction in his presence by quiet waters. And sometimes it means following him into darkness. But on all these diverse paths, the foundational principles are our eternal welfare, his glory, and our resemblance to the shepherd. Notice one important word. David carefully chooses his words. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," he leads us through this valley. The dark valley isn't the final destination. The thick darkness is not the last place of rest prepared for him. It's a corridor leading somewhere else. Surrounded by dangers, enemies, and uncertainty, David knows he will pass through all this with his Lord, who guides him. Think about where all his paths lead. Sometimes the shepherd ensures that all these dark valleys remain just shadows. So 3 Hebrew youths, countless times singing David's song, defied Nebuchadnezzar's bear. They knew their shepherd was near and could save them if he wished. But even if not, they resolved to remain faithful. And when they entered the fire, their shepherd was there with them, and they remained unharmed. But sometimes we're not unharmed. Death comes, tragedies strike, hearts break, persecutions ensue. Sometimes the deliverance we hoped for doesn't come. And then what? Does he still lead us through these valleys? Yes, Jesus, the great shepherd, led the first martyr Stephen through the dark valley of death to where, ultimately, all his paths lead to himself. Stephen, gazing into heaven, saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God, leading him into glory. Goodness and mercy followed him all the days of his life, and this day was no exception. Psalm 23:6. Regardless of when death ultimately comes, Jesus, his shepherd and ours, will lead through death itself to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23:6. God himself is the destination of David's journey, as described in the 23rd Psalm. The valley of the shadow of death, even if it proves to be something more substantial than a mere shadow, leads directly to the shepherd himself. Everything that exists, all rivers, roads, and valleys, leads to our eternal home to him. Psalm 23 serves as a powerful reminder of the constant guidance and protection provided by our heavenly shepherd. Despite facing dark periods and dangers, our faith in God allows us to feel sheltered and confident about the future. The essence of the psalm lies in the understanding that our existence is not limited by death, but directed towards an eternal dwelling in the presence of God. Our ultimate goal is to be with God forever, regardless of the challenges and trials we may encounter along the way. If you found this discussion on Psalm 23 insightful and meaningful, consider subscribing to our channel for more thought-provoking content on spirituality, biblical insights, and personal growth. Stay connected with us to explore further discussions and deepen your understanding of faith and life's journey. Subscribe now to join our community of seekers and believers on this enriching exploration.